Welcome. Happy Lag BaOmer. Tonight and tomorrow is a special holiday called Lag BaOmer, which means the 33rd day of the Omer, being that we're in the period of counting of the Omer, which began the second night of Passover and concludes the night before Shavuos. It's a holiday when we celebrate the receiving of the Torah. So 49 days. Some of you may be familiar with it through my book, my spiritual guide to counting the Omer. So tonight was the 33rd night of the count. But besides being 33, it is a special day, it's considered a day of celebration. One of the sad things that happened during this period, which actually has nothing to do with the actual counting, was that due to the fact that the students, the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, did not respect each other, did not show respect to each other, so there was an epidemic and they all died. And the epidemic ended on the 33rd of Omer. That's one thing. And that's why we don't make weddings and we don't celebrate unnecessary celebrations that can be done other times, and music and so on, leisurely things during the Omer period. But on Lag BaOmer, weddings and celebrations do take place. And the second thing that happened was it's the yahrzeit, the passing of the great Tana, the great Talmudic sage, and also the great mystic and author, father essentially of Kabbalah, the book, the classic book of Jewish mysticism, which is the Holy Zohar. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was his name, or known in the acronym Rabbi. Today was the day when he passed away, and he specifically asked his students that his day of passing should be considered a day of joy, because he's reconnecting to his source and re-entering the total and seamless connection. B'chad katiris katarni, he says, with one bind I will bind myself to God, will no longer be limited by and fettered by the body and the material existence. So he asked that it be a simcha, day of joy, and ever since, that's exactly what has been done. His students, and then their students, and their generations afterwards, till this day, it's considered to be a great celebration. Just tonight, in Israel, now it's 7 hours behind, celebrations, we're talking about 500,000 people or more, make a pilgrimage to Miron, which is the northern part of Israel, where Rashbi's burial place is, and that's where they celebrate and dance and all kinds of different customs, lighting bonfires, all in response to Rashbi's request, which was, as said, kept all the years, and especially the Arizal, Isaac Luria, who lived in the 16th century, who was settled in Tzfat. Ultimately, Tzfat is not far from Iran, it's a little drive from there, would actually spend 3 days during the Lag BaOmer period, 3 days before until Lag BaOmer, and celebrate as Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai requested. Which of course begs the question, which we'll discuss hopefully, why of all tzaddikim, all righteous people, is his Yom Hilula, is his yahrzeit considered such a celebration? And until this day, it's the only yahrzeit that we actually celebrate in such a fashion. So even though it's true that the sadness of any loss, and I'm sure when Rashbi passed away, they sat shiva for him and so on, so even though all the passings of tzaddikim in the beginning is sad, but over the years becomes a significant day, but still, the only one that remains such a powerful day and across the board, the entire spectrum of the Jewish nation, Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Chassidim, non-Chassidim, Litvaks, and so on, all celebrate, is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, is something unique about him which we shall address as well. So for these two reasons, the end of the epidemic and the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is what makes Lag BaOmer a special day. Now these two things are actually connected, if you wish, because even though most of the 24,000 students did die tragically, but some remained, and one of them was Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. He was one of the students that did not pass away, did not die in the epidemic, because he fulfilled, as his colleagues did, the grand cardinal rule that Rabbi Akiva, their teacher, taught, which was V'haftar echa kamocha, loving your fellow, is klal gadol b'Torah, is the fundamental principle, the great principle of Judaism, of Torah. Which of course begs the same question, why then the 24,000 students could not fulfill their own teacher's great precept and edict, which is to love. And I'll try to address that as well. So that's what Lag BaOmer is about. However, it still needs explanation. What's so special about this day? That even though the reasons I just gave are the technical reasons, but there has to be some more power to it than just because there are many times, many days in the year that are yard sites and birthdays and other special days, and yet Lag BaOmer has this almost mystical and mysterious power. That it's not quite a holiday it's not like Passover, Shavuos, or Sukkot, or so on, or Purim, or Hanukkah, and yet it's become in Jewish tradition, especially in the diaspora, the years after the destruction of the temple, because Rabbi lived after the destruction, such a prominent, you don't have 500,000 Jews making a pilgrimage almost any other day of the year, even on the great holidays. So clearly there's some power here. So we'll talk all about this, and hence the topic of this class is, what is your deepest secret? Consider this a Lag BaOmer workshop, and I'll dedicate it to my own dear father, whose 10th yard site will be this Shabbos, the 20th of Iyar. So Lag BaOmer is the 18th of Iyar, meaning tomorrow, and this will be the 20th of Iyar, 10 years ago. So I'll dedicate it to him. I obviously would not be here were it not for him. That's a pretty strong certainty. You could say that about all our parents, but since I'm giving the class, I feel honored to be able to dedicate it to my father. So what is your deepest secret? So we all have secrets. Would you agree? Okay. And we all have very deep secrets. Question is, what do you think is your deepest secret? What does it look like? Is it a dark and shameful part of so-called the ugliest parts of your personality that are kept, only you know about it? Or does it have something, is it bright and beautiful? Very good question to ask, right? If you listen to good old Dr. Sigmund Freud, tell you that the secret is a dark cellar of the id, which is essentially a sex maniac that needs to be kept at bay, and therefore we have a superego that challenges it, and I have an ego that's like a mediator, attempting to find some balance in this world. And this has become a very predominant and prevalent way of looking at human beings. I'm not saying everyone does. Freud has many of his detractors who have rejected that approach. You have Carl Jung, and you have, of course, Viktor Frankl, and others who saw the heart of a human being, not the sexual or selfish narcissist, the beast, but really the angel, which is a very different way of looking at ourselves. So when you ask yourself what's your deepest secret, it connects immediately to who are we at heart. If you go to the core of a human being, who are we? We may not even be aware of who we really are. So when you ask what is your deepest secret, you think about what conscious secrets. What are your secrets that you shared with no one? Some may even argue that secrets by definition are forbidden, which is why they remain secret, which of course feeds into the negative perspective. On the other hand, is that true? Is that really our final take on the human being, that our deepest secrets are of the negative sort, are ugly, essentially? The reason I'm speaking about it is because obviously this has direct impact in every part of our lives. Because if indeed your deepest secrets are dark and foreboding and cause you shame, and you would not want to share it with anybody, which is, of course, the best sign. If that's someone to say, well, are you ready to share your deepest secrets? And most people say no. The reason for that is because they are embarrassed of it. If that's indeed who you think you are, in your deepest place, it has real implications. It's not a minor issue. Because that, of course, then tells a lot about your own self-esteem, self-perception. So even though on the forefront or on the outer surface you may appear a happy-go-lucky guy and very upbeat and optimistic, but if indeed you think that deep down, or not so deep down, in the deepest crevices of your secretive private places, you are really not so beautiful, then it has to have an impact on how you see yourself. And what are the implications of it? How does it affect our attitudes and choices? Our fears. A person who's ultimately self-loathing, or at least part of themselves, they think, if I really was exposed, the people really knew who I was, or they wouldn't exactly respect me, then that has to be a haunting factor in our lives, even when you're not exposed because it's you know. No one else may know, but you know. So this question is one that really addresses the core sense of who we are as human beings, how we see ourselves, and really what makes us tick, what shapes who we are. Now the reason I'm speaking about it, Lag BaOmer, is because Lag BaOmer happens to be the birthday of all mysteries and secrets. I'm coining that. I don't think I've ever seen it written somewhere, but let's put it that way. The birthday of all mysteries and secrets, because, as I mentioned before, and I'll elaborate more now, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was the father of Jewish mysticism, which is what's called Sod, the section of the secrets of the Torah. In Torah Judaism, there is 4 levels of interpretation, 4 dimensions of interpretation of any Torah concept. One is pshat, which means literal interpretation. The second is remez, allegorical, metaphor. The third is drush, which is Talmudic, homiletic, law-related, Jewish law. And the fourth is sod, which means secret literally, the esoteric, the mystical, the secrets, the inner dimension. And what's fascinating about this, number one, is that there's an acronym in Hebrew. The 4 that I just said, pshat, remez, drush, sod, make up a word. And that word is pardes. Pardes means an orchard, a pardes. So pei, pshat, reish, remez, drush, and sod. What's even more fascinating that these aren't just 4 methods of interpretation. They actually reflect 4 dimensions of existence and reality. As the Kabbalists explain, Chassidus elaborates, they correspond to what is known in the mystical world. The mystical language is known, and the mystical map, I should say, the cosmic map, is made up of 4 worlds. Worlds here, not planets. Worlds means 4 dimensions. 4 stages of evolution, cosmic evolution in the cosmic order from what we call from spirit to matter. And just to make it palatable, just to give a simple example, that everything in existence, everything we do goes through 4 stages from conception till actualization. So let's take, whether you're writing a book or a business plan or come up with some other type of strategy, everything always begins with a vision. You have a vision. You have a spark of a vision. Then that vision in turn turns into an outline. That outline will then be fleshed out in details. That's step 3. And step 4 is the final product. So think of it from the point of view of architecture. Someone who conceives of a particular type of beautiful building they want to build. A home, a palace, a museum, whatever it may be. So, first thing is you need to have a vision. You need to have a unified, cohesive picture in your mind. What would you like? And you have the end in mind. But in the vision, everything is united as one picture, but it's not broken down. Now, how are you going to do it? That's the what, but how? So then you have to somewhat lay it out in some type of outline. So you begin drawing a blueprint. A blueprint is, here's what I want this to look like. The rooms, the size, and so on and so forth. Then, after you have an outline, you flesh out the outline to break down to full details. And then comes final step 4, where it's really a full-blooded, full-dimensional entity, either ready to be built or built. Same thing with a book. You have a concept, an idea, a vision. Then in turn you make an outline, chapter headings, section headings. Then you begin to break down the outline into subcategories and subtitles and sub-chapters, subtopics in an organized fashion, like branching down. And then finally you have the full-bodied entity, the book. This is true about almost not almost everything we create in an organized way will need these 4 steps. If one of these steps are compromised, you won't have, something will give. Now all this originates the way God created the universe. Wanted to create it in a logical manner, so he created what we call the 4 worlds, where they are Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Those are the Hebrew names. Atzilut means the world of emanation or the world of unity. That's the vision. Where even though it's made up of components, but the components are all completely consumed and submerged in the vision of what is wanted, the vision. Then comes the world of Bria. Bria literally means creation. Bria is considered to be a matter without form, a shapeless piece of matter. Like think of it as a general outline that's not yet been broken down into details. Then comes Yetzirah. In Hebrew, the word Yetzirah, Tzura, means shape and form. So if Bria is like think of a piece of clay, Yetzirah would be the clay is now being shaped into a particular vessel or a particular image. And then comes the world of Asiya, which is the fourth and the full-bodied, full-dimensional entity. The building has been structured. The building has been built. So these four worlds the Kabbalists explain, and this actually is discussed in the book of Zohar, which is authored by Rabbi Shimon by Yochai, as I mentioned, and discussed in later works as well. It's actually we actually allude to it in our prayers every day, and there's a verse in the book of Isaiah where it says, "L'kvoidi, kol hanikra b'shmi, l'kvoidi, barosov yitzartiv afasisiv." That's where the original statement is made. So l'kvoidi is covered, which means honor is Atzilus, and then barosov yitzartiv afasisiv is Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. And in the morning, when we say the soul you've given me is pure. Neshama shenasati b'tahirihi, that's Atzilus. Ata barasa, you've created it, Bria. Second step, the outline. Ata yitzarta, you've shaped it. That's the third step, Yetzirah. And Ata nafachta bi, you've imbued it, instilled it in me. Ata meshamer b'kibi, that's where you're protected. So these four you'll find very many places. The rungs of the ladder that in Jacob's dream, Jacob's ladder had four rungs. You have the four empires. You'll find in Judaism the number four is very predominant. Coming from Passover, we had the 4 cups of wine. You have the 4 matriarchs. The list goes on. But they all correspond to these 4 dimensions. The Daled Raglei HaMarkava, the 4 legs of the chariot, the 4 wheels of the chariot. And they represent 4 dimensions. And in intellectual discourse and intelligent conversation, these are the levels of Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. That anything in life has, when we speak a conversation, an intelligent conversation has the literal meaning of what you're saying. It has the things you're hinting to, Remez, you allude to, you allegories and so on. You have the Drush, the things you can derive and study from the idea. And then you have the Sod, the inner secret, the inner message. So you can have a person having a conversation and you may only pick up the literal surface, superficial message, when in truth there's other layers. Now, of course, this requires the person who's teaching or speaking is someone that is intelligent and has all those dimensions. The Torah has these 4 dimensions. They're not 4 different interpretations. They're 4 layers of one interpretation, one more deeper than the other. And you cannot understand anything in life if you only look at the one level, not the other. Let's go back to the examples I was giving. Those 4 worlds, those 4 levels. So from the perspective of the architect or the composer or the author knows what vision he or she has, and then they lay out a outline, and then the outline turns into a fleshed out details, Yetzirah. So Atzilus is the vision, Bria is the outline, Yetzirah is the shape and form, and then Asiya, the end of the picture. You have now the piece of art, the piece of music, the book, the building. From the perspective, however, of the outsider, you come to pick up the book, or you look at a beautiful building, or you observe a nice painting, or you're listening to beautiful music, you work your way from the bottom up. You don't know until you study it what is behind the scenes. So you begin first by looking at the book, you read the book, and then you realize the book has a message. And you retrace the steps from the bottom up, exactly what the author did from the top down. And in life, that's how everything works that way. Look at ourselves as human beings. As human beings, you see everything except yourself, you see from the outside in. But yourself, you see from the inside out. When you wake up in the morning, no one has to tell you what you look like or what you feel like. You know what you feel like. What other people feel like, you can't know until they tell you. So everything we look at, even the people we love and people we care about, you look from the outside, and then from the outside you try to understand what's going on the inside. When it comes to our own self, we look at everything from the inside out. So essentially, when you're really truly studying Torah properly, and you're studying it especially with the inner dimension of the Torah, which is called Pnimis HaTorah, the Sod, the secret, you're looking at things from the inside out. So just to use a simple example, if you see someone crying, you see tears come out of their eyes, even if it's tears of joy, you know that the teardrops are just indicative of something. They're not the cause, they're the result. They're the result of feelings that have welled up inside the person, either joy or sadness, that have in turn filled the tear ducts with liquid, which in turn caused teardrops to come out of the person's eye. We can only know it when we see someone else crying. The person that's crying doesn't need to know they're crying because they feel first the sadness or the happiness, and then in turn it translates for whatever reason into a teardrop. We can only know it from the outside in. Same thing with a smile on the face. You see someone smile, a smile indicates there must be some reason that the shape of the mouth is going this way, because there's a feeling that when it's converted into a physical contortion, it looks like a smile. This is essentially the difference between looking at things from the inside out and the outside in. When you train your mind and you train your emotions and you train your soul to look at things not superficially, you begin to recognize that everything has a cause behind the scene. Whatever you see is never the entire picture. It's not what you see, is not what you get. Besides the fact that, first of all, a person can be in deep pain and is showing you a smile, and may be actually not only not reflective of what they feel, they may be even hiding what they feel, and actually projecting something that's completely not even accurate. It's called echad b'peh, echad b'lev. There are people who actually are deceptive. What they say one thing, and then they mean something else, and their heart is elsewhere. They smile to you, and they can stab you in the back. Just to go to the ultimate of duplicity. Because that's the world in which we live. We live in a world where the outer and the inner are not necessarily aligned, even though a healthy human being would be completely aligned. For example, look at newborn children or young children who have not yet learned the art of deception and duplicity from us adults. They're seamless. What you see is what you get. That's why parents actually have to warn their children not to say everything they see, which of course starts teaching the children that you have to learn how to lie or how to not say everything. Because by children, they're seamless. There's no two worlds. There's no duality. So basically, we then developed this dichotomy, and you could say actually this dissonance, cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance, a dissonance between different forces. But in a healthy reality, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah are one flow. One flow that begins with a vision that turns into an outline that goes and fleshed out in details, and then has a final product. So imagine, just to use these are examples. Now let's broaden the example from the microcosm. I mentioned tears and smile. It's raining, let's say, outside. So most of us, we see rain. Oh, you hear there's a weather rain. We put on a raincoat. We take an umbrella. However, you prepare yourself for this, what some people think is a disaster called rain. It's actually a blessing, but so be it. Rain. If you ask the meteorologist about rain, they'd say rain is simply like teardrops, a result of processes. Different meteorological forces, wind patterns, climate change, pressure systems, low, high, different mixes of how the ocean functions and so on. Because the rain is just simply a result of many causes. No different than the eruption of a volcano is caused by built-up pressures that may have built for thousands of years. Like an earthquake, the relief of tension. When you see someone burst out in anger, it's exactly like a volcano. That means there's something going on inside that's causing a person to burst in anger. It's not just an end in itself. In other words, there's always a deeper secret behind, a deeper cause behind any effect that we witness. So ultimately, the way the Kabbalists see the world is, if the meteorologist will tell you that the rain is a result of different weather patterns and wind systems and barometer and pressure systems and so on, the Kabbalist will tell you that the rain is perhaps the angels crying. Maybe it's a type of cosmic sadness or cosmic joy that's expressed in what we see as rain. So rain is a cleanser. It cleanses the world, just like wind is like a vacuum cleaner. That these are forces that are coming from a more spiritual state, that when they evolve in a physical state, that's what they look like. It shouldn't surprise us. Everything in life is that way. As I just said, you don't ask someone, first you cry and then you feel sad, or first you feel sad and then you cry? The answer is obvious. So the Torah's level of interpretations, the pshat, the literal, is the surface level, the tip of the iceberg, beneath which lies these three other levels that I just mentioned. And that's Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. And thus the secrets of Torah. The inner dimension, what the Rabbi came to teach in the book of the Zohar, are not some type of other dimension. They're actually the inner dimension of everything that we see, giving us a glimpse into what's going on behind the scenes, behind the curtain, that shapes the forces that we recognize so readily. So essentially, it's a glimpse into the inner workings of what makes us tick, what makes the cosmos tick. That's essentially what we call primis HaTorah. That's why it's called the soul of Torah, because there's a body and there's a soul. So someone will ask you, let me ask you, how do we define you? Do we define you by your body or by your soul? Your personality is clearly not just defined by your, God forbid, your corpse. A personality is made up of a whole bunch of forces that are not visible to the eye. And the question of how deep that personality goes, we only know what we know consciously, and how much is there behind the conscious. So behind our behavioral mechanisms lies a series of emotions and intellect that shapes that behavior. Cognitive and emotional forces that shape your behavior. But behind the cognitive and the emotional lies a whole bunch of unconscious forces, which by definition means it's unconscious, so we're not aware of it. Which, of course, I'm leading to your deeper secrets. We're getting there. I wanted to first lay this out the way it's seen. So in Judaism, just like there's a body and soul in life, for example, you look at the words of a page in a book, the words are the body, the soul is the message. Musical notes is the body, the music itself is the message, is the idea, is the energy within it. Sometimes using language of Kabbalistic and Hasidic language, it's called Eiris and Kalim, energies and containers. If the teardrop is a container, the emotions within it is the energy. So everything is made up of a container and energy. A container is the expression of something, and the energy is what is causing that expression to be that way. So this is, yes, essential psychology that precedes Freud, that precedes modern psychology. This goes back thousands of years. The basic way to look at something, that what you see is only the outer expression of forces that are within, that are not that visible. So we see ourselves from the inside out. We see everything else from the outside in. But what the goal is that you should be able to start looking at others also and start sensing how things are from the inside out. So the same thing with Torah. Take any particular, let's say, mitzvah, Jewish law. Take Shabbat, Shabbos. So Shabbos, if you're familiar with the laws, you know there are things that are prohibited to be done. 39 different types of work that are enumerated in the Torah that were related to the building and the work in the Mishkan, in the temple, in the sanctuary. These are considered work. Essentially, in one word, work means creating something, shaping something. In Shabbat, it's forbidden to shape and create. And there are 39 different ways that one can do that. Now, that's the technical, the mechanical part of it. So that's why, according to Torah law, there's a whole bunch of laws that prohibit and actually discuss, is this considered work, is it not considered work? Can you do this, can you do that? A whole bunch of series of things. Some places there are disagreements. In many places there are description of what is considered work. That itself is up for different discussion. But there are a certain consensus of what is considered not acceptable. Now you can grow up your life living and knowing all these laws and just knowing that Shabbat, you're not supposed to do all these things. There's a few things you're supposed to be doing. There's certain prayers, customs, different things that is considered to be Shabbos. But you ask most people who grow up in Orthodox homes, they will usually tell you Shabbos is a day that you do nothing. And that's why many people grow up with a very negative taste of Shabbos, because they feel like sometimes in prison, where it's a day where you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, and so on. I was just sitting with someone that's a very observant Jew for his entire life, and he says to me, something, at some point, I feel I've been brainwashed. Who cares? God really cares if I text on Shabbos. Why is that like antithetical? And if I text someone about Shabbos and about spirituality, why is that so bad? I'll press a little button here and there. So how do you answer? So you could just answer that, that's a sacrilegious statement. You're not allowed to say that. It's a law, and it doesn't make a difference whether you understand it or not. Okay, fine. Some people that will be good enough, especially if you throw into the pot a few punishments. So that may be a deterrent for somebody that don't want to burn in hell, or they don't want to take the risk. Okay, I'll stay away from it. But there are a number of people, and you can imagine there's more than just a few, that say, you know what, I'll take the chance. And they don't necessarily, the deterrent of punishment or just silencing them is not enough. So fine, you can criticize them and say they're rebellious, etc. But is there something you would say to your children who ask you this question? They say, does God really make a difference if I turn on a switch or not? I mean, I understand go lighting a fire or go building a structure or something like that. So of course you can give all kinds of answers that it's not a matter of how much effort you exert, it's what you're doing, it's the result of it. But at the end of the day, you get into a fine-tuned, hair-splitting discussion, an argument about little details which may be missing the point of Shabbos in the first place. Because someone has the bigger question is, why does it matter? Who really cares if you do these things or you don't do these things? And I would challenge anyone to answer this in an intelligent way to a skeptic who's not necessarily being malicious, in an intelligent way, just using pshat, just using the literal interpretation. What's pshat say? That since God created the world in 6 days, as we say in Kiddush, which comes from the verses in Genesis, so that's why on the seventh day he rested, that's why we also rest. That's the legitimate reason. Sometimes the reason is given, it's connected to Mitzrayim, Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is another discussion. So then, okay, fine, very nice. So you tell me like this, 6 days, what happened? God got tired? What happened on Shabbos exactly? He rested. What does that mean? That he got tired? And just like he rested after 6 days of work, we rest? Is that really what's going on here? Does God get tired? And let's be honest, if you can't create in one day, 6 days you can't create either. Nobody, why did God need 6 days? He could have created everything in a second. So if you really start discussing it in an intelligent manner, that it just carries the question over to what is God exactly? Why did he rest? What does it mean that he rested? What does it mean exactly that God rested? For what reason did he rest? There's no way to answer this properly without some deeper understanding. Not to say so you have to understand what does God mean and what means rest and why we have to emulate God. And the answer is not that complicated. Most of you may know it. But it's a little more spiritual. It means, obviously, God does not get tired from working. It's the creation of existence is the divine, and essentially going outside of its natural habitat to create a material world. In other words, materialism is outside of spirituality. And after 6 days of God immersing in creating a spiritual universe and existence, God essentially returned to his natural habitat, which is a more spiritual type of state. And therefore, we too are that way. You are not a product of your work. You are a soul inside of a body. So 6 days of the week, we're told, immerse in the material world, shape it, create, refine it, do whatever has to be done. But then there's a day where you go back home into your own inner life. So Shabbos is the world day of inner life. 6 days is the day of outer life. Not to say in the 6 days of the week we don't have prayers and other things that remind us of the inner, but 1 day a week we're entirely dedicated to the inner life. And yes, when you're completely in love with someone and you're completely enraptured by it, you don't have time for texting and other technical things because it's not a technical day. Now, when I've told this to a number of people who grew up with very intense Shabbos, they didn't even believe what I said. They said to me, that's some new age version of Shabbos. That's not the Shabbos we grew up with. And then when you show it to people, well, let's read the verses, Vayechulu. What does Vayechulu really mean? And the other words that are used about God resting, it becomes very clear that it means something more than just, well, we think, I got tired, so you know what, I went to stop and rest for a day. But when you speak about it to people who actually didn't grow up with Shabbos, it's beautiful. It makes total sense. Especially in this high-speed world in which we're living. Imagine having 1 day that you impose upon yourself to go back just to have a conversation with someone. Not depend on machines, not immerse yourself in shaping something outside of you, traveling back inside yourself. That's Shabbos, the spirit of Shabbos. What I just described is the way the Zohar, Rashbi's classic, and the way the Primus Torah describes Shabbos. You'll find it also in the Talmud, that Shabbos is connected to Einig, pleasure, and so on. But many people, pleasure means they eat more. They eat shont with more zest than they do throughout the week. That many people, that's considered Shabbos. If you think about it, that can be just as materialistic as the Baal Shem Tov once showed his students a person dressed in all the Hasidic garb, and he was eating cholent on Shabbos, and suddenly they saw the face of the person change from a human being to an ox. So it was known as the oxen ashtraimu. You could be Shabbos and eating all the Shabbos meals, but you're eating like an indulgent person. That's not. So you can be keeping Shabbos but not be Shabbosdik, just like you can be eating kosher and not be kosher. It's kosher in the spiritual sense of the word. So the bottom line is Judaism can also be rendered into a mechanical, robotic, and hollow system if you don't recognize that behind the pshat there's remez, drush, and sod. Just like a marriage can be rendered into a meaningless relationship if it's just automatic pilot and people are just good and completely stagnant. A relationship by definition is dynamic. It needs to constantly be renewed. It needs to constantly be refreshed and reinvigorated. And that requires the spirit. You can't just go through motions. Sometimes you go through motions, but nothing can last forever if it's just motions. And exactly the same thing with Judaism. It's not just a mechanical set of laws. There's a whole soul behind it. And that's why the Zohar says in very beautiful terms, there's Gufa Daraisa, the body of Torah, and Neshmasa Daraisa, the soul of Torah. And it's the soul that gives the vibrancy. Just like a body is dead without a soul is not grounded and not concretized without a body. That's why Judaism isn't just a spiritual system. The first cannot be taken out of its literal because Judaism is a fusion of body and soul. So it's not just enough to say that I think about a mitzvah. You have to act. We live in a material world. The ultimate beauty of Judaism is the fusion of the spiritual and the material. That you infuse your material actions with spiritual, with soulful and spiritual energy. And the fuse you two, this is called a kavana, maisa mitzvah and kavana sa mitzvah, the action and the soul within it. And then you have a full entity. And the same is true in our human experiences and life experiences. A true experience is not just going through motions. You know, there are people who walk around on earth and they say they're like living dead, walking zombies. I may be biologically alive, healthy and all that, but my emotions are dead, my mind is numb, my soul is lost. So yes, so physically you can call it life, but it's lacking the whole spirit within it, which is the same four levels that I described before, Pshat, Remez, Drusad, and Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilus, also reflect in the four levels of the soul. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chai Yechida come together usually. What are they? Nefesh. There's 5 different names for the soul, or 4 in general. One is biological life. That's like Pshat. That you're physically alive, you're breathing, your heart is beating. Next is Ruach, is also emotional life. Your emotions are alive. And the next is Neshama, intellectual life. That's Bria. So we have Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilus is spiritual life. Transcendent life, a life with purpose, a life with vision. So you see these 4 that I've been describing are 4 that really give you tools to address anything in life. And you could actually gauge where you stand in this world. Where do you reside most of your life? On the Asiya level, on the Pshat level, or on the other levels? Are you just surviving? Are you just biologically alive, working, making money, satisfying your needs? Or do you have a sophisticated and evolved, a mature emotional life? Are you also growing emotionally and intellectually and spiritually? And you can diagnose a person pretty quickly to see where most of your life is preoccupied. The healthiest life, the happiest person, is the one that all 4 that I just mentioned are engaged. And they're all constantly feeding each other. Even though many people you say, well, see, they seem happy even though they're just living and surviving. Yeah, right now they may seem happy. Then when some challenge happens, shaken to the core. The healthy person is the one that has all 4 working properly. Now, if you think of it from the perspective, let's say the analogy I gave earlier with the architect. So someone will say love. Take love as an example, chesed. So you can have love on a functional level, on a biological level. You could have love on a Yetzirah level where there's also shape and form. You can have it on a Bria level where there's the general structure of it. You can have it on a vision level. So imagine a brilliant architect, a brilliant conceiver, conceives of unbelievable palace. He's going to build a beautiful palace, a beautiful home, and envisions it, lays it out in a blueprint, fleshes it out, and then passes it on to the contractors, developers, and they begin to build. So the way it should be built is they should be following the guidelines of the visionary, of the one who conceived of it. But let's say, for argument's sake, there's no one there to maintain quality control. And some people decide, you know what? The bricklayers say, I think we should put a few less bricks here. The electricians decide to do this. The plumbers decide that. Everybody decides to start tampering. And suddenly what you have is a disaster. The visionary, the architect comes and looks at this whole building and says, what did you do? They said, well, we decided this is essentially a life that is not defined by vision. What's happened is the vision has been hijacked by the functionaries. The vision has been hijacked by the functionaries. Now, when you think about our own life, the question is a very simple one. What drives your life? Do you have a vision for your life? And that drives your cognitive, emotional, and behavioral actions? Or whatever comes your way and seduces your senses is defining what your life will look like. So in a healthy form, you begin with a vision, a mission, and that mission and vision define and inform the rest of the steps. You begin with Atzilus and you work through Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. But unfortunately, most of us do not live our lives that way. Because number one, no one's ever taught us that's how you have to work. We live our lives from the outside in, not from the inside out. What does the outside in mean? We get our education, we're taught all kinds of skills, and then you go ahead and try to use those skills to make as much money as you can to make it in this world, pay your bills. And once you're in the rat race, you have no time to sit around and start talking about vision. You already have to struggle to survive. That's essentially what is going on. Comes a day like Lag BaOmer, and a man like the Rabbi. And though there were many sages in his time, but he was considered unique even by his colleagues and by his teacher Rabbi Akiva and so on, as the many different phrases said about him. And he says, we have to have a reality check, and we have to go back to the drawing board and realize that we're not just bodies, but we're also souls. Now, mind you, all his colleagues, all the Tanoim and later the Amoraim, the scholars and sages, they all knew about the inner and outer Torah. But it was Rabbi that taught it. He was the one that was the so-called the representative of Pnimis HaTorah. But it was known by every master, except many just knew it themselves and they didn't teach it to others, or taught it just to very few individuals. It was Rabbi that documented it. Documented into a book that's very cryptic, and without later interpretations, it's almost difficult, almost impossible to understand many parts of the Zohar. But he did document the mysteries of existence, because you need to know the engine room. It's not just enough to know the mechanics. So even though many of us live our lives and so when you buy a computer, you buy another gadget, a mobile phone or something like that, so you just follow a few instructions, you press buttons. You don't need to know all the back end and behind the scenes. That was done for us already by engineers and designers and programmers and so on and so forth. But imagine there are no programmers left and there's no one to turn to in case something goes wrong. What Rabbi did, he was the equivalent of the inner engineer of teaching and documenting in the book of the Zohar as he dictated it to Rabbi Abba, who was the one that actually wrote it down. As the Zohar tells the story when it talks about the last days of his life, the Rashbi's life, which is Lag BaOmer essentially. It's in the end, it's called the Idra Zuta, which is a small group of students that gathered together the day Rabbi passed away, and they documented all the events. It's a whole part of the Zohar, the end of the Zohar, Hazinu, the third volume. And there you see the documentation of the cosmic map, of what is the map that dictates existence as we know it. It's essentially the spiritual DNA and cellular structure of existence. That's what the Kabbalah is. So it's the inner dimension, it's like the vision, the Atzilus, that lies behind the scenes of the mechanics of what we call halacha. So Jewish law and the Talmud discuss more primarily the mechanics, Even though there's plenty in the Talmud that is also esoteric, especially the Agada, the stories and so on and so forth, where the Reiv Sedus HaTorah, as the Baal HaTanya writes, the most secrets are hidden in those stories. But the laws themselves are the mechanics, which you must have. As I said before, you need to have a structure. But what's the shapes that structure? What defines it? That's the inner. That's on a cosmic, macrocosmic level. One of the principles is that every macrocosm is reflected in the microcosm. Olam Katan Za Adam. The human being is like a small universe. So we too have a outer and an inner. Our outer is the mechanics. You want to know what makes you tick as a human being on a biological level? You go to a doctor. You go to people who are familiar with the anatomy and the biology and the chemistry of a human being, including the neurology, including cardiology, and all the other different parts of the human being. And they, through their knowledge and their examination and their testing and scanning, can give you an X-ray or a CAT scan of your body. But once you start dealing with elements that are not so tangible, like the psychological part of ourselves, the soul, there no CAT scan can give you a picture of what your soul looks like. So here too, the Kabbalah and Hasidic thought gives you a picture of your soul. Your soul is made up of components. They're not physical components, but they're components. There's a mind, there's emotions, there are forces behind the scenes, as I said, the unconscious. And they describe what your inner workings look like and how they function, and how to align and repair something that's unhealthy. Remember, if you don't know what a healthy version of a part of your personality is like, how could you know how to correct it? You ever see when, say, doctors take an X-ray of the lungs, if you have some, God forbid, infection or blockage or something in the lungs, so they put it up on the screen, right? And you see, you see a healthy set of lungs, and then they show you the set of lungs that have some problem. Why do you need both? Because that's how you compare it. This is what the healthy. If you didn't have a healthy version, how do you know that something's not healthy? You always need a model. The same is true in psychological and emotional and spiritual health. You need to have a model. And that model is what's laid out in Kabbalah and Hasidic thought. It gives you a snapshot, an X-ray of what a healthy soul looks like. So then you can juxtapose where you're at and say, okay, so how am I compared to that? And then you have something to work toward. For example, in the book that I did in the Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, where you take Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, the different 7 emotional attributes, 7 times 7, and if you ask yourself the right questions and you look into the details, you can then say, okay, this is healthy love. And now you can say, where does my love stand in contrast to healthy love? Where does my discipline stand in contrast to healthy discipline? Compassion, same thing with determination, ambition, humility, bonding, and dignity, the 7 emotions. So it's all about understanding what makes something work for you to be able to then say, okay, where do I stand in context of that? Many people, for example, who grew up in homes where the marriage was a horrible marriage, their parents did not have good relationship, and I'm just using an extreme, let's say the worst possible, or really bad. So what model do they have when they get married? Why won't they repeat what they saw? And unfortunately, they usually do. Unless they've been hurt enough, or they're smart enough to realize that that's not healthy and have to figure out how not to do it that way. As a matter of fact, there's some people who grew up in such horrible situations, they just do the exact opposite of their parents and they do very well. So our modeling is everything, because that's where we get our models. Where do we see love for the first time? How our parents love us. Very straightforward, it's as simple as that. Or don't love us, or love us in their particular fashion. So what the Kabbalah and Chassidus do is a reality check. This is what a healthy entity looks like. And now let's figure out where you are in relation to that, so you can then begin to really work on it. If you convince yourself that something that's wrong is not a problem, obviously you're never going to heal from it because you think it's not a problem in the first place. Yediyas hamachla chetzi refuah. Awareness of the problem is half the cure. And that's what the Rashbi contributed, being the father, the first that documented Kabbalah, in a language, again, that's quite cryptic and quite inaccessible, but in the generations that come, the commentaries on Zohar, and there are very many, especially the Arizal, especially later Hasidic thought, deciphered it in palatable terms that we can talk about it, even if we're not necessarily on the highest spiritual levels. And today we must talk about it because we don't live in a healthy world. It's once we lived in an insulated environment where you picked up many healthy attitudes just from the smell of the chicken soup in your grandmother's kitchen. And there were no other forces that were shaping Shtetlach and other environments. It's one thing. But when you live in a world like ours, where there's so many forces demanding our attention, and so many things that inundate us with everything, it's more critical than ever to have a healthy model. Where are you going to get it from? It won't just come automatically. Now, yes, if our parents and our environments are perfect and healthy, great, but we all know where that stands. Not suggesting there are some people that are beautiful people and they're great role models, but it's not guaranteed, and it's definitely not the common. It's more the exception. So why do we need so much the teachings of Hasidic and Kabbalic teaching today? And I say Hasidus because to me, Kabbalah, modern Kabbalah is Hasidic thought, meaning that you really can't understand Kabbalah on its own without a Hasidic interpretation. And frankly, it's really the essence of everything I teach is coming from those sources. It is the map of what makes us tick. So just like you can read a parsha in the Torah or follow a mitzvah, as I said, mechanically, every mechanical thing has internal engineering. And that's the psychological, emotional, and spiritual dimension of it, which today is critical. Without it, sadly, it's almost impossible to keep people just mechanical. I'm not saying it's impossible completely. You see it because you do have herd mentality, fear, conformity, not wanting to rock the boat is definitely incentives for many people never to look inside themselves. But how long can you keep that secret? How long can you keep it like that? Is it sustainable? So the bottom line is that Rashbi we owe a great debt to, because that's what he did. He was the father of Kabbalah in that sense. Just like the Talmud is the basis of the entire Jewish constitution of law, Kabbalah, Zohar is the basic constitution of mystical secrets behind the scenes. So now let's go back to the big question I started the class with, which is, what is your deeper secret? And for most people, as soon as they hear that question, I can tell you immediately, because I've tested it, they immediately have recoil is the word. Because as soon as you hear my deepest secret, most people's deepest secret is not something most people want to share. Because deepest secrets go into areas of sexual, sometimes things that we have a lot of shame about. Some call the ugliest part inside my dark closet, etc., etc. That's how most people think about when you talk about the deepest secret. So it's off limits. We don't talk about it. You want to talk things I'm comfortable to talk about? Okay, fine. Let's talk about, you want to talk about some secrets? I'll tell you some business secrets. I'll tell you some secrets, some tips of real estate tips. I'll tell you some tips of how to invest. We have to find all kinds of nice deflections. But the deepest secret, how many people do you know, if you ask them the deepest secret, will smile and say, let me tell you my deepest secret. I'm proud to tell you what it is. You're not going to find many people. But as I said, today is the birthday of all secrets and mysteries. Sod, Teres HaSod, Eilam HaSod, the world of secrets. If you ask Rav Shimon by Yochai, tell me the deepest secret. He said the deepest secret is that you are a piece of God. That your soul is a divine force. That if you cut to the core of who you are, you're an angel. And even greater than that, a divine image. So why is that so distant from us? Why is that something we would never think of that? You know why? Because we don't relate to that part of ourselves. We relate to the other parts, the parts that we have come to become accustomed to, the parts that we escape to for relief, for whatever it is that we escape to for. And that becomes our so-called refuge. And it's often not a very pleasant and beautiful place to look at. But the truth is that the deeper secrets in life are actually the most beautiful parts, because at the end of it all, the bottom, if you go down the rabbit hole as far as you can go, you know what you're going to meet. You're going to meet the real you, and you're going to meet, the real you is a piece of God. You're going to meet God. That's what Judaism teaches. So it's true that even though there are many detractors to Freud, but Freudian thought, what I sometimes call Darwinian Freudian model, is a very dominant model. Even psychologists who completely disagree with Freud, and I mentioned again Jung, and I mentioned Frankl and others, nevertheless, there's still the dominance of the theory that human beings, cut to the core, are not beautiful people, are selfish people. Reading a book like Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, it's very depressing when I read it the first time. You asked me if I read it a second time. Yeah, I read it more than once. Because I needed to, not because I was so interested in it, because I wanted it disturbed me. Why did it disturb me? Because he turned it into a science. The selfish gene. He's, of course, one of the radical atheists of our time. He happens to be personally a nice guy. But he's a radical atheist and makes the case against God and how religion is the most destructive force in history. That's Richard Dawkins. He has to have Jewish blood, even though we haven't discovered it yet. Because no one can be so atheistic, Christopher Hitchens has been a Jewish mother. Sam Harris is Jewish. A few others are big Jews. But, it doesn't matter. But why is he called the selfish gene? Because he didn't just go ideologically and psychologically. He went with biology and showed biologically and chemically we are selfish entities. And the gene itself, not just the human being. Human being, you could say we have free will. You see people who act nobly and people who act selfishly. The gene is selfish. And once you render the gene selfish, then there's no hope. And he proves it, because you see in the theory of Darwin, survival of the fittest, that every life force is going to compete for its own survival. And it'll do anything for survival, even if it has to kill you. That's the selfish gene. And that's what drives nature. It's merciless, and the concept of a conscience, of like justice, does not exist. It's simply a non-existent entity. Now, if you know philosophical Schopenhauer, in philosophy, he was a big advocate of that. He actually even says the whole concept of romance, of we consider so noble, romance, love, honeymoon, intimacy, Schopenhauer says it's just a trick of nature to get two human beings to breed, because for some reason, a quirk of evolution, a mistake of evolution, human beings became too intelligent for their own good. And had they just been like other biological forces, they would just know, you come together, male, female, you breed, and you go right. You don't need to have dating and going to bars and courtship. A waste of money, a waste of all that. Just do it. Any animal or any bacteria or any form in nature. Understand survival means that you have to perpetuate the species. Human beings, however, evolved into becoming a little more intelligent, and it doesn't pass, as in Yiddish language, to just breed. What do you mean? We love each other. And to love each other, we got to get to know each other, and we have to have a conversation. And there isn't no such thing as just breeding. It sounds indecent. It sounds inappropriate. He actually makes the case that that's just a quirk of nature that distorted it, and it shouldn't have been that way because it's a lot of waste of resources. I know it doesn't sound very romantic, but nevertheless, this is prevalent thinking in our Western world. Judaism, of course, rejects it outright because it says God, with human beings, created in the divine image, and at the heart, we're not selfish genes, we're actually divine genes. The fact that there is elements of survival, yes, of course. But that does not mean it compels you to have to kill others for you to survive. You have a battle going on, as the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya and Tanya, and based a lot on Zohar explains. There's a battle. You have two voices. There's the selfish part of your gene tells you be selfish, and there's another part of your gene says be divine. And who will win? It's up to you. So there you go. What's your deepest secret? It's up to you. Unfortunately, all of us, and I include everybody, because no one is immune. If you see differences, for example, some communities, you'll see what they call ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Haredim. And then you have other communities, we call them the ultra-liberal secular. In Hebrew, Haredim Chilanim. That's all on a surface level. We could all look in the pictures. Oh, this guy has payas. This guy has this type of yarmulke. This one wears this kippah. This one wears in the middle of his head. This one wears on the side of his head. This one wears it under, etc., etc. Everybody's got their dress code. This is externals. What's going on beneath the surface? Do they all share the same DNA? Yeah, pretty much. Jeans, yes. Does everybody cry when they're sad? Yes. Doesn't make a difference what clothing you wear. So what about our souls? Are the souls very different? Is someone born, is there such a thing as an orthodox Haredish soul and another liberal secular soul? Is that accurate? So you start thinking, it's like laughable actually. I've shared the story when my book Toward a Meaningful Life came out, and I was on a book tour. I was in Miami Beach, South Beach. So they have every November the International Miami Book Fair. And I was invited then to speak. My book had come out. It was 1996, I think, or 1997. And it was at the end of 96, I think. November. And I spoke with large audiences. There was a place called on Lincoln Road, Colony Theater. Beautiful theater. It was a full house. I gave my talk. I don't even remember what I said, but I remember what happened after spoke. So a woman gets up. Afterwards, there were questions from the audience. And she asked the following question. She said, before I get your book, I'd like to know what your opinion is on conservative Judaism. Conservative not as opposed to liberal, but conservative as Reformed, conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, etc. Because I hear people like you, she said, don't recognize conservative Judaism, and I don't want to buy the book of a bigot. Those are her words in a theater, resounding when everybody was quiet, and very good acoustics. It was a very, you could say borderline heckler, right? Or maybe a real heckler. Anyway, the place became deadly silent. When you hear he could hear a pin drop, because everybody wanted to know, what am I going to say? So I decided to take full advantage of the dramatic moment. And I said, it took a little effort to do this, but I said it with a little chutzpah. I said, that's absolutely true. I don't recognize conservative Judaism. And I fell silent. And the place began hemming and hawing. You could feel the tension. And people started literally they couldn't believe I said that. And I wasn't even going to explain myself. So I waited for effect. It was all very deliberate. And I said, but before you stone me and get violent, I'd just like to add, I also don't recognize Orthodox Judaism, nor Conservadox, nor Reformadox, nor Reconstructionodox, nor all the doxes that have been invented and will be invented by human beings. Because you see, Judaism has a constitution. It's called the Torah. And only in the Torah do you have words like Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative, or other labels. Labels are for clothing, not for souls. And let me reverse the question. Was Moses Orthodox, Conservative, or Reform? And what about God? Is God Orthodox, Conservative, Reform? Is God even Jewish, if you want to really push it? So anyone, even with a rudimentary understanding of souls, knows you cannot define a soul by man-made country clubs, like, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, kosher form, of course. I think in Argentina there's a kosher McDonald's, right? Okay, just in case, yeah. Because man-made labels, human beings create a definition and make a group. The Torah is the one that dictates what you call somebody, what you don't call somebody. So the answer is, there was no such thing as orthodoxy. That became a name once there was Reform and then Conservative. So then, by contrast, whoever's not is Orthodox or is more stringent or whatever you want to call it. But is a soul born Orthodox soul? Can you define a soul by saying some souls are brown, some are orange, some are square, some are rectangle, some are 60 feet tall, and some are 2 feet tall? No, because a soul is not defined by physical proportions, and therefore also not defined by man-made definitions. You want to know what a soul is? You look in the Torah. Neshama, vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. God infused a soul in a human being. He called it a tselem elikim, an image, the divine image. And no other definition was ever given in Judaism that suggests otherwise. So actually, calling a soul by these labels is frankly desecration of God's definition of the soul, because you're imposing your definition over the Torah's definition. And I didn't elaborate that much in there. Let me just tell you the end of the story, just because it's interesting what happened. So I said, so the woman followed up, she said, that's an excellent answer, but how do I know you really believe that? Maybe it was a good way to get out of the question. So here I had to already feign indignation. And I said, listen, lady. I remember I said that. I said, listen, lady, life is filled with risks. You're going to have to buy my book. And if you don't like it, we'll give you your money back. Whether she did or she didn't really matter. But she gave me a story. For 20 years I've been using this story. So I thank her. Because I would never have had this story had she not asked the question. It was actually a great question. I've shared the story so many times. I actually shared it once speaking in a conservative place, conservative synagogue. It was one evening, a lecture I gave. And a man after my telling the story, said to me, so what would you do about this? This point, I say, if it was up to me, it'll never happen. If it's up to me, I'd eliminate all the denominations and just go back to Moses' definition and the Torah's definition of Jews. But it'll never happen because now all the denominations are invested in their corporation. Everybody's got a board, and they've got board of rabbis, and everybody's got their committees and whatever they call it. So it's now a business, and you can't just stop it all. And the guy began single-handedly applauding me. And then he says, I totally agree with you. I happen to be the rabbi of this synagogue. That's what he said. He was the conservative rabbi. And I guess he has issues with his board, but whatever it may be. The point I want to make here is, I go back. This is not my nice, cute answer. I know this because I studied a little Zohar. And I studied, obviously, the explanations of Zohar. You want to understand a soul, you don't go to a medical doctor. Just like you don't go to a auto mechanic to understand the secrets of neuroscience. And I'm not saying this to disparage any auto mechanic. We all need them, and they have their value, and they know their knowledge. But you have to go to the expert in the field. You need an expert on souls to talk to you about souls. Just like a physicist needs to understand quantum mechanics if you want to talk about quantum mechanics. You can't use Newtonian physics to discuss quantum mechanics. Even Einstein, the great, great physicist, maybe the greatest in all of history, had problems with quantum mechanics. You need to know that world to be able to speak about it. You can't talk about fire with the tools of water. Everything has its scope. The Rabbi is a master of Kabbalistic spirituality. He wrote the magnum opus of spirituality. He wrote it, as I said, cryptic book, very difficult to understand on its own. But it is the encyclopedia. Then, and I full disclosure, read Zohar, very difficult. But the interpretations of it, beginning with the commentaries, the Arachama and the Migdash Melech and the Ramaz and all the teachers of the students of the Arizal, and the Arizal, of course, himself. And then when you go into Chassidus, and especially Hasidic discourses like the one I teach every morning called Ayin Beis and other places, they open up and it's mind-blowing. You can't believe what you find once you start seeing. You see literally a map of the unconscious. You see a map of yourself. And it resonates because they know how to explain it in terms that make sense. In the Zohar, things are very code language. It's like looking at formulas. You can't really understand. It'll say a word like Chachmas Dimah, the hidden wisdom, but you don't know what it means. They'll say words like the light of darkness. I'm just giving Butsina de Cardenissa, expressions that are very cryptic. And until you understand what they mean, you don't see the relevance. So here is a man, Rabbi, who we honor and celebrate today. And that's why he was such a powerful force. You see him run all the pilgrimages. They sing the songs. They sing about him almost like, I can't call it deifying, but they speak about the Rabbi. But it's based on Talmudic statements. Rabbi Akiva calling him the most special of all students. Because he was able to bridge body and soul in a very direct way. As I said, his colleagues did it too, but they did not teach it. They were not the so-called the propagators of it. And from the Zohar grew all the body of inner wisdom that we have, the mysticism, the soul. And gave us the biggest gift of all, your deepest secret. Yotz nichnas yain yotz sod. You drink wine, comes out the secret. What's the deepest secret? The deepest secret is the secret of the divine secrets that you carry inside yourself. So of course, it's like anything in life. There's that joke they tell about this Litvak who did not learn Chassidus and did not learn the inner. That one night he woke up in the middle of the night in a sweat. His wife says, "What's the matter?" He says, "I had a terrible nightmare." "What was your nightmare?" "He dreamt that God died." So she said to him, don't you know what it says in the Talmud? That you dream by night what you think about by day. You know? If you didn't think about God by day, you wouldn't dream about him by night. He says, what can I tell you? I haven't thought about God for years. I don't know why you're saying that. And the second half of the story is that there was a happy ending, because after God died in his mind, they came to be maspid him. They came to eulogize God. And the eulogies were really beautiful. And he couldn't decide which was worse. Because, he would never hear such beautiful eulogies about God had he not, so-called, expired. Now, of course, I know this is sacrilegious language, but when a person gets drunk and drinks wine, it says, when you drink wine, the secrets come out. The expression goes, was is afen lung is afen sung. By a drunk, what's on the lung is on the tongue. It actually rhymes both in Yiddish and in English. Those rare moments where it rhymes in both languages. Now, it all comes down to what you have inside of you. If you have folly and foolishness and frivolity or frivolousness, whatever the word is, within you, so obviously you drink, all your narishkeiten are going to come pouring out, which unfortunately you see very often. You see someone who's a great scholar and sage, and I've seen this, drink, what comes out? The deepest secrets. So your secrets are simply just revealing who you are or what you think about. So when most people think of the deepest secret, they think of it in a shameful way. My deepest secrets are not very pleasant, to put it mildly. They're ugly. They're things that nobody knows about. It's my own little secret. Because that's where you live. That's where you reside. So you think that's your secret. When you learn Rashbi's Torah, you start understanding what a soul is made of, and you start realizing this is my soul, you start realizing the dimensions of yourself you have no idea about. You decided that you know your deepest secret. That's the deepest secret you're aware of. Based on your limited experience and maybe based on your immature ways of finding relief and your immature ways of discovering whatever your own little place that you find some comfort in, you suddenly realize the horizons open up and you realize there's a whole bunch of levels of dimensions within me I would never have known before. So besides thanking the Rashbi and all his students and students of students, all the way to our day that gave us these secrets, it actually is transformative. How could you ever become a better person unless you know who you are? Because at the end of the day, what you think you are, that's what you play out your script. If you think that your deepest part of you is an ugly thing, then what do you think? What kind of life you're going to live? Yeah, you may fight it. You may regret it. You may say, I need to do tshuva. I need to correct it. I'm in trouble. But what tools do you have? All you can say is, I'm in trouble. When you study these ideas that Lag BaOmer teaches us, then you discover these parts that you can say, now I have something to work with. You can't work with yourself unless you know you have it. It would be the equivalent of someone telling you that you're a brilliant musician or you're a great tennis player. I'm just using very simple examples. And you say, what are you talking about? I can't play music. I can't sing. I don't know what you're talking about. Can't play tennis. I say, no, I see that you could. So how could you change? And let's say you're wrong and the one that sees it is right. The only way is by them teaching you about yourself. You just don't know who you are. And then you discover a dimension. You say, you know something? I didn't even know it was there. Can anybody here in this room on earth say with complete confidence, I know all my potential? I know everything that makes me tick? How could you say that? We have no clue. We only know what we were told or what we experienced or what we've come to recognize. So essentially, in a certain way, you could look at the Rashbi, even though it's now almost 2,000 years since his passing. I don't know the exact year. It would probably be 1,800 years, 1850. What do you think? Something like that. It was 100 years after the Churn. Yeah, something like that. A man like that, essentially, is a gift because it's like a mentor that tells you, I believe in you more than you believe in yourself. And I could reveal to you dimensions of yourself that you don't even know exist. Tell me, is that not worth pursuing? Even if you're a skeptic and say maybe, maybe not. Because what are the stakes? The stakes are that you may discover things you never in your life would have known. And that's what Pnimis HaTorah, the inner soul of Torah, does. It opens up your mind and your soul and your heart to places no way you could ever reach on your own. Does anybody that you know not like music? Does anybody here not like music? I ask only because I remember I had one classmate, the only person I ever asked in my whole life, he said to me he doesn't like music. I still think there's something wrong with him, but I've never met anybody that says they don't like music. It actually doesn't even take effort. It's not like music takes effort. All you got to do is open your ears. You don't have to open your ears. You just let the music play. I'm not talking about playing music, listening to music. Now imagine the sadness of a person who can't hear music or doesn't appreciate it or never heard music. What does it do to us when we listen to a song? Now, I know it could be very superficial and just temporary, but a song opens up the person to new experiences, just like knowledge does. And there's no way that you can grow and expand your horizons and spread your wings if you don't know you have wings, or you don't know how wide your wings can spread. And that's only possible if you learn and you're taught this is what you're capable of. When you learn the Rashbi's words, you learn things that you're capable of you never thought you are. And initially you may even feel that's not me. But the more you immerse yourself and the more you're around other people that immerse themselves, you suddenly realize that possibilities are far beyond only that you could ever imagine. So at the end of the day, when you say my deepest secret, the answer really is, of course, you're going to answer what you know. You can't talk about that which you don't know. So comes a day like Lag BaOmer and challenges us and says, no matter what that deep, dark secret you may have, and no matter what you convince yourself that deep down you have all kinds of stuff that is not very proud, you're not very proud about, the truth is if you dig a little deeper, there's a whole reservoir of power beneath that. And that's what you have to learn to access. And when you learn to access that, it weakens those dark, deep, dark secrets that many of us think defines our so-called secret lives. All of us can access it, and today's the day when the door opens. It says in some Sfarim, it says, Samachvov and other places, that Lag BaOmer is the Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah. So it's just like in a few weeks will be Shavuos, the Matan Torah of the general Torah. Lag BaOmer is the Matan Torah of the inner dimension. Other places I think it says Rosh Hashanah of Pnimis HaTorah. There's different expressions. Simchas Torah, Pnimis HaTorah. So we have a day today that, as I said at the outset, is somewhat of an enigmatic day. You know, Lag BaOmer. On one hand, as I said, almost 500,000 people or more make a pilgrimage. You see celebrations everywhere. Most people have no clue really, besides the fact they know it's Rashbi's Day of Joy. But they can't really put their finger on it. The finger is because Rashbi touched a chord in our unconscious, literally, being the Baal Hasad, the one that revealed the secrets, to the point that we're able to, today, once the road has been paved, a pioneer, it becomes far easier to access that dimension. They say there's an expression that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You can be a brilliant scholar and a brilliant teacher and be able to explain great oratory skills and be able to explain an idea in an eloquent, profound, and practical way. But that doesn't mean you touch someone else's soul. And then there are other people who may not have all that brilliance, but they can touch another person. Now obviously you want the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, very often scholars, Torah scholars, who may have taught us much in our lives, have the former but not the latter. And then there's those that have the latter and not the former. What Rashbi did, who was both a great Talmudic scholar, of the top, as I said, one of the students that survived the epidemic, students of Rabbi Akiva, at the same time was also a master teacher of the inner. He fused both. The ability to be brilliant scholarship with all the technical part, but without compromising and being able to touch the soul. Why do I mention it? Because it's a very rare combination. The statistics show, and most people will say this, they'll say, the more religious somebody is, the less spiritual they are. The more spiritual, the less religious. Or statistics put it this way, that 90% of Americans will say they're somewhat spiritual, believe in God. Only 40% will say they associate with a religion. That's a pretty big discrepancy. And the reason is very simple. Religion associates with ritual and the spiritual associates with free spirit. Very few people see religion. They may see it as beautiful, guidelines, tradition, heritage, nostalgia, 100 other things. But free spiritness and spirituality is seen as the free spirit, associated with music, associated with intimacy, with love, with sexuality, with expansion. So even those that defend religion will say, okay, religion may be narrower, but it's structured. And people need structure in their lives. If you just are free or bohemian, you have no guidelines, no direction, you just go nowhere. But the truth is, Judaism is not one or the other. It's really the fusion and the joining of the two. Which is creating a balance between, as I said before, the inner and the outer. The pshat, remez, jus, sod, the atzilus all the way to the asiyah. That our actions and even our mechanics are driven by, informed by, and vitalized by a soul within a body. That's like when you meet somebody who has both they may have the experience and knowledge of life, but they still have the sparkle in the eye. Their soul has never aged, because souls don't age. Many of us succumb to the aging process where we become more resigned, more inflexible, more slower, more sedentary is the word. Sedentary, that's how you pronounce it? Not sedentary? Okay. Senility is the word? Yeah. Sedentary leads to senility. Yeah. And what we call the couch potatoes, right? Lack of mobility. A soul is like flame, and a flame is always alive. But a flame also needs a wick. So here we are, Lag BaOmer. The celebration continues. A day that, as I said, special in the sense of the birthday of all secrets and all mysteries, and above all, the secret and mystery of who you are. So the real secret of your life is that you are an agent, a divine agent in a hijacked or held hostage in a material world with the power to free yourself. But the only way that could have that power is by accessing that dimension within you, believing in it, and recognizing it's more powerful than the id. It was like I like to put it, that Freud had it half right. He was right that there's a force beneath the surface that drives us. But it's not the id, it's the yid. ID, Y-I-D, the Pintele Yud. So he dug as far as he could dig. Maybe his mother had something to do with it. Clearly he was defined by that to some extent, his Yiddish Shema. I hear that his wife lit actually Shabbos candle, Freud's. And then there's the Yid, the Pintele Yid, which is the spark, a divine spark. So though it's true, we read in the Torah, it says, Yetzer leva Adam ram in the Urav, that the inclination of a person is cruel or selfish or evil from childhood. But that's in the second chapter in the Torah, in Noach. The first chapter says you're created in the divine image. Unfortunately, and maybe this has been some of the Christianization of Jewish ideals, it rendered it all into the concept of original sin, that we're really, really more evil than good, or when it's a necessary evil, as they put it. So especially the area of sexuality. When in Jewish thought, the Tzelem Elokim was never annihilated, God forbid. It may have been concealed to some extent. It may now have a battle with Yetzer Hara, so the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, the animal and the divine soul. But the divine soul was not annihilated. And that is a critical component. That's why Jews look at sexuality not as some dark secret. Yes, it could be used in the horrible ways. It could be very destructive. But at the end of the day, it's God's power to give us to create. It's a divine power. That's why the Ramban writes in a famous letter that it's not a dover meguna, it's not something despicable or to be ashamed of, because it's a divine force. But like every great force in life, like any great fire, if you contain it, you channel it, you harness it, it can change the world in a positive way. If you don't, it consumes you and everyone around you. So in that sense, sexuality itself can be a deep secret that is very embarrassing. And it's like, the worst part of you, even though you can't control yourself. Or it can actually be the yid behind the id. And that is the divine force that drives sexuality in the first place. Which is why Judaism doesn't call it sexuality, it calls it intimacy. V'yada adam eschava, das. It's called knowing God. Knowing the person you love. It's not a technique. It's not a physical action. Sexuality is a spiritual action that expresses itself in physical form. But you have to appreciate that and know that that's its real secret. As opposed to the way most of us have been trained or to think, which is driven very much by the more, materialistic or hedonistic version of it. I don't know who it was that said this. I think it was Marilyn Monroe, but I don't know if something I should quote, but it's a good quote because I think I take it a step further than she said it, even though she ended up being Jewish too. I think she converted to marry Miller, right? The playwright. I don't know what kind of conversion it was, like Sammy Davis Jr., I guess, Elizabeth Taylor, a lot of these converts. She said that sex is emotion in motion. And what the Jews would say, Torah would say, that sexuality is really divine force in motion. A divine energy that manifests itself in physical experience. But you have to be wise and you have to know that it's that case. And that's something that is not really taught properly as well. So that's another topic, not for now. I just wanted to include it into the whole picture here. So my friends, there's two ways to look at yourself. You can look in the mirror or not look in the mirror. Imagine yourself in the worst possible way. And that when push comes to shove, what do you resort to? Sometimes things that are very embarrassing and you'd never want anybody to know. But you could also look at yourself that beneath it all lies a beautiful soul, a divine image that may be trapped, may be held hostage by yourself as well. And unless you learn to believe in yourself and learn the secrets of the Torah that teaches you the secrets of you, who you really are, you may remain trapped in that place. So yes, Hasidic teaching, I'll say it without any apologetics, helps you understand yourself in ways you would never believe, in ways that you would never be able to find on your own. And that is a tribute to the person we celebrate today, Rabbi, which maybe also explains why he unites the entire Jewish nation, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, from many different schools of thought. People unite, similar to the Arizal. The Arizal was also this uniting force, who is interesting. His yahrzeit is also in a sad time. Rabbi is in the middle of the Sphira days, the epidemic ends, and the Arizal's yahrzeit is the 5th of right before Tisha B'Av. The Tisha B'Av is a result of the destruction of the temple, which came through divisiveness, just like the 24,000 students of the Rabbi Akiva were divisive. They didn't honor each other. So Magdim Refu Lamaka, the illness is preceded by the cure. Rashbi is the cure for the days of Sphira, the divisiveness, and the Arizal is the cure for the divisiveness of the destruction of the temple, which continues today in a perpetual way. That's why the Yerushalmi says that a generation that doesn't rebuild the temple, it's as if they destroyed it. That means our job is to find the unity between each other. But first you have to find the unity within yourself. If you yourself are divided between your body and soul, between your inner secrets and your outer behavior, you can't find an integration between your divine and your life, between Atzilus and Asiyah within you, it becomes increasingly difficult to find unity with others. So unity is a result of looking into the inner forces, that the vision that unites it all. Remember before I spoke about the bricklayers. You want to understand life in a unified, cohesive way, you have to understand the vision within it all. And that again, the Rashbi and the Arizal in his time did that. And that's what, by learning the inner dimension, like he says in Tanya chapter 32, which my opinion, required reading for every person, says the only way you really can come to love the love of another is by seeing the soul more important than the body. Anyone that makes the material body more dominant and the soul secondary cannot truly love another person. Because love essentially is the transcendence of a person beyond their own material needs to be able to see and experience another. Bodies divide us, souls unite us. In souls we can find a commonality. embodies your food can't feed me, my food can't feed you. Materialism by definition is selfish. So Dawkins had a right, just like Freud had a right, but only half right. The right that they saw, which was the secret that they could discover. And then there's the other dimension, which unites. So may this auspicious day serve everybody well. So Kedai Rab Shimon Lismach Alav B'Shas Adchak. The Talmud says we can rely on Rab Shimon B'Shas Adchak, which means in distressing times and difficult times. And the Munkid Shemich Rabbi Michal Salazar explains that Adchak goes on Golus, every form of displacement, exile, any form of dissonance. So Rashbi has the ability to us to transcend and find that connection to get beyond dissonance, beyond chak, beyond anything that's distressing. Which is also why this day is a special day of blessing, especially for marriage, and specifically for children. On this day, because it says in the Medrash that Reb Shimon was poiked akaris, which means people, women who were infertile and had difficulty with children, like Bomer and Rashbi was a person who was able to help people. Why? Because he was able to break through the boundaries, get into the inner secrets, open up the channels of birth and life. And that's why many, in all the generations, you always find that special blessings were always given in this time. So anyone that has special needs in the area of Bonei Chaya Mezayin, which means children, life, health, Mezayin, which is sustenance, this is a day where the channels are open because you have a man that bridged all the worlds together in a very revealed way. So may this day serve everybody well. And of course, the more we do, by being receptive, by studying, we have a whole day. Today is a perfect day, tomorrow, to open up maybe a book that explains a little of the inner workings of Hasidic, spiritual, Kabbalistic thought. And hopefully it can be a beginning of really broadening our horizons even more than they've been broadened till now. And with that, I'd like to bid everybody a very good week until next week. It will not be a class because I will be going to Israel. And if anybody wants to send a message or a prayer, I'll be going to Israel. If you want to send some charity, I'll also take that. I'm happy to do that. But I will record a class, which means there will be a class broadcast, but it won't be live in this room right now, at least according to the plans, the way if God allows me those plans. But we will resume the week after that. Again, I want to dedicate the class to my father's 10th yahrzeit this Shabbos. And I want to just introduce Philip Nammerworth, who's sitting right here. People often hear and ask who Philip is. Philip is a long, many-year colleague, student of mine. Began giving his own class over 20 years ago. 25 years?
29.
29 years. Who's counting?
Creative spirituality.
Creative spirituality. Philip himself is a singer and songwriter, boogie-woogie mystic. And so anybody interested in Philip's class is definitely highly recommended. And it's good to see you, Philip. And I bid everybody a very beautiful week and with beautiful secrets and mysteries to reveal. Thank you very much. Thank you. Happy like Ba'amar.